I think we're going to go ahead and get started since it's 9 a.m. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the special occasion in honor of International Women's Day. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica Watts. I'm the founder and president of Elevate, our Materion employee resource group. This group is comprised of men and women, all of whom are dedicated to the equity and advancement of women in all roles at this company. Joining us today is a fantastic panel of female leaders at Materion. Emily Liggett and Darlene Solomon are the two women on our board of directors. I'm sure you'll recognize Shelley Chadwick, our Chief Financial Officer, and Shannon Bennett, our Executive Vice President of Global Communications. Today, these panelists will talk about their careers and how they exemplify this year's theme of embracing equity. We have a list of questions to kick off the conversation. Then as time allows, we will turn it over to the panelists and give them an opportunity to share their individual stories. At the end, we will take questions from those of you who are joining virtually or in the room, or those who may have submitted questions ahead of time. Before we get started, let's take a minute to get to know our panelists a little bit better. Can you introduce yourselves to us? We will turn to you first, Emily.
Hello. Greetings. It's nice to be a part of this conversation. I am an Indiana farm girl, so I know a little bit about the Midwest. I have a degree in chemical engineering and then later one in business. So I'm a material science who has mostly worked for high-performance materials companies, which, as many of you know, have a lot of men. So it's been a really great ride over years to see how things have changed. On a personal side, I've been married to my college sweetheart for over 40 years. We have 4 adult children and 6 grandchildren. And so as part of my story of working, I have, had the pleasure of working full-time most of my career, but also part-time. I've job shared. I've taken sabbaticals and time off. And I also had a stay-at-home husband for a while. So I'm happy to talk about any of this with you during this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily, for sharing. Next up, Darlene.
Yes. Hello. Greetings, Materion. I'm Darlene Solomon. My background is growing up in San Francisco, and I'm on the Bay Area, still living in the Bay Area. I have a bachelor's in chemistry from Stanford and a PhD in bioinorganic chemistry from MIT. So that was my East Coast time prior to Materion. I really wasn't sure if I wanted to go into academia or industry at that point. And I knew that I would be happier in industry, and the question was whether I could find sufficiently challenging problems to contribute to. And I found that was absolutely the case in industry. And so I joined HP Labs, Hewlett-Packard Labs, as a scientist out of grad school. And I was an individual contributor for about 5 years. And then the opportunity came along to try out management leadership. And I really wasn't sure if I would enjoy it or not. But I figured I could always go back to being a scientist because I knew I was pretty good at that. But things did work out well. I really enjoyed the expanding responsibilities over the years. Honestly, some came sooner than desired and some took a little longer. But in 1999, and so I've been with one company all the way through, but in 1999, Agilent IPO'd out of HP. We basically spun out. And at the time, it was the largest IPO in the history of Silicon Valley. I have had the Chief Technology Officer role since 2003, so like 20 years now. And I have served under all 3 of Agilent's CEOs as part of the executive leadership team. And with that, I've had the chance to help lead, in some ways even navigate 3 corporate transformations for the company. From a diversified technology company, which gave me a lot of perspective on the markets of Materion, to a premier measurement company in electronics and life sciences, to a market-leading life science and diagnostics company, which is what we are today with about a $45 billion market cap. I've been a director at Materion since 2011. I was the first woman director, but honestly, you guys, perhaps more significantly, I think I was the first director, I believe, outside of Cleveland. I have a husband. I've been married to him. He's professional. He's a wonderful family, 2 adult kids, 1 older son and 1 younger daughter. So great to join you all. Wish I could be there in person.
Thank you, Darlene. We appreciate that. Shelley?
So those are great introductions. I don't know if I can compete with that. Good morning, everybody. I know most people in the room and hopefully most of the people on the phone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks so much, Jess, for organizing this event. It's great to take a minute to recognize International Women's Day, which I think is really important. I think you know a little bit about me, but just maybe some personal things. I'm originally from Massachusetts, born and raised there, did all my schooling there, my undergrad and my MBA as well. Started out in manufacturing companies and quickly realized that's what I loved to do, to be a part of a company that was really making something that was driving innovation. I loved that part of the finance side of things. I've moved through a few different manufacturing companies. I worked for BF Goodrich, started out in Massachusetts. They had a specialty chemical side, which has changed names a couple times, but is currently owned by Lubrizol up in Wickliffe. Moved to Ohio with them and thought I'd stay for a year. And I think it's been 23, so you see how that went. But I had great opportunities to continue to develop and to see different parts of a company, whether it's different parts of finance or also, business partnering, corporate roles. Really gave me good perspective around the kind of things that I was interested in, but also, different functions that worked around me and how to participate as part of those. I've had great mentors during my career. I'm sure we'll talk some about that. I wouldn't be sitting here today without the encouragement of them. Personally, I have a very helpful husband who has taken the lead on a lot of things with our kids and with the house, which also allows me to sit here today. And I have 2 daughters who are 13, Caitlin and Chloe, who are in the 7th grade.
Thank you, Shelley. And last but not least, Shannon.
Okay, great.
Before Shannon speaks, in the room, could you speak up a little bit? We're fine in the call, but just the audio in the room's a little low.
Okay.
Could you speak up a little bit? Thanks.
So project then.
Okay.
I know. Okay. Well, tough acts to follow. All of you have such accomplished careers, but here I am, and also born in Massachusetts, and now I'm like, I think I have almost the same story in some regards, but yeah, grew up south of Boston, lost the accent about 20 years ago, luckily, but started my career in journalism. Maybe that doesn't surprise you. I guess I do leave the town halls every quarter. But in TV journalism, I was a producer, which gave me a lot of good experience of how to make decisions in the moment and how to move through a crisis. So I think maybe looking back, it makes a lot of sense. I left that to work for the state treasurer in Massachusetts. She was the first female elected to statewide office in Massachusetts at that time. And that's where I kind of cut my teeth in sort of PR, crisis management, and communications. After she lost her race for governor, I decided to try my luck in the private sector and went into the grocery industry, which was an industry that my family had worked in for many years. And I thought it might be more stable than politics, but it was, I think, bought and sold 3 times in 5 years, and there was a lot of consolidation in that industry. But I would say that, if I hadn't joined the industry at that time, if there hadn't been so much turmoil in that industry and so much sort of crisis to deal with, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. I think that opened a lot of doors for me. And I think, the big lesson from my story is that sometimes the toughest things that you face might be kind of career-defining moments for you. So I think that that's the thing that I've learned. After 6 years kind of leading communications at Super Value, which was the grocery company, they were based in Minneapolis, so I did kind of move all over the country too. I didn't mention that. After 6 years leading their communications function, I moved to Cleveland to try my luck in global manufacturing and ended up at Alaris Corporation in Beechwood. That company was sold, a pattern, I guess, in my career 2 years ago. But that opened the door for me to Materion, which has, a fantastic growth story and so many things to talk about. So I'm really excited to be here thrilled and just humbled to be on this panel this morning. Thank you. I am a mom of 2 kids, 2 middle schoolers, 6th and 7th grade, who, all of a sudden are way smarter than me. As of a week ago, I now no longer know anything. And I spend a lot of time, chasing them around, but live here in Ohio. I too thought when I came here, I would only live here for a few years. And it's a tough place to leave, particularly once your kids and your husband get comfortable. My husband's a small business owner, and we love it here. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Emily and Darlene for joining us virtually today, Shelley and Shannon for joining us in the room, and giving us the opportunity to get to know you all. The reason we're here is International Women's Day, a global day celebrating the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. The day also marks a call to action for accelerating women's equality. International Women's Day has occurred for well over a century, with the first gathering being in 1911, supported by over 1 million people. Today, International Women's Day belongs to all groups, collectively, everywhere. This year's theme is Embrace Equity. I think it's important to clarify the difference between equity and equality. Equality means each individual or group of people is given the exact same resources or opportunities. Equity recognizes that each person may have different circumstances and allocates the exact resources or opportunity needed to reach an equal outcome. The mission is to get our world talking about why the move to providing opportunities with the same equity is important. Let's go. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues in the Elevate group and supporters of its mission. They will introduce themselves and start the conversation. Let's start with you, Justin.
Morning, everyone. I'm Justin Campesino. I'm part of the Materion HR team and part of Elevate DRG. So thanks for joining us today. So you have also shared a little bit about your really interesting careers. So to start us off, I'm going to ask Emily to start us off. You can share with us, is there one particular experience that you had in your career that you felt was a turning point for you?
Oh my goodness. So I'll tell you a little bit more about my career path because I waited for this question and didn't share it in the opening, but it's relevant. It's got so interesting to hear about the others' careers. But I did start with a very large company, DuPont, after undergraduate, and worked as a field engineer, which gave me different assignments, every year or two, which is really great for me because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. And through that process, I realized it was not R&D. Sorry, Darlene. I just needed quicker feedback. But I really loved manufacturing. So hence I've been with manufacturing companies most of my career. But then I went to grad school, actually out west in California, which was almost like a foreign country, when you come from an Indiana farm. Learned a lot about myself out there. And then started with a materials company, again, doing a lot of different assignments. And for me, since we started our family at that point, I did a lot of lateral moves for 10 or 12 years doing sales, marketing, operations, all kinds of different things. And then once the youngest was in school and my husband was able to stay home more, then I was able to get into general management and really enjoyed that. And I've been a CEO for the past 25 years. But it was a lot of, I wouldn't say there was a strategy to it, but the way it worked, you make the best decision you can at that moment. It worked well for me to get a good, strong foundation before going into management. But like Darlene and the others, I learned I really liked working with people, and that became a big part of focus. So anyway, and then I got into entrepreneurship, the last 10 years or so. So back to your question, Justin, about a turning point. Guys, there's so many turning points, in careers. But I think for me, having some of those early times where I had a chance to see what I was good at and what I really loved sort of getting out of bed in the morning to go to versus those things that I had to force myself to do, thinking it was character building, which I think it was, but to try to leverage your strengths was a real eye-opener for me. Because it's easy for us to think we need to get better at things we're not very good at. And there is some truth to understanding what we don't know, be self-aware of what we're good at and what we need to trust others to do. But I think the real strength is finding out what unique skills we have and leaning into that as much as we can.
Yeah, that's good feedback. Darlene, I don't know if you have anything to share as well.
I think that for me, there were a few turning points, and one of them was really realizing what it meant to lead a group that had much more expertise in areas where I was not the expert, and that being able to help them understand how they could be success and add the business value to the technology was probably one of the key turning points for me that really led to, a more executive kind of career. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And Shelley or Shannon?
So when I think about that, you try to think about which one was the most impactful, right? So it's fun to answer these questions because you think back through what's becoming a longer career the older I get. But, if I think about when I moved to Ohio and was working for BF Goodrich, it was a very stable company, and that name probably resonates with a lot of you as a really old school company. And 2 years after I had moved, they got basically turned into an LBO. They spun off a portion of the company. We became independent, and there was a lot of change at that time. And as still a relatively young professional, that's a great learning experience to figure out how to be more agile, how to deal with change, how to be part of the change. But at that time, I worked for a CEO who, by the way, Shannon has also worked for at parts of her career, which is interesting, who believed in giving high potential younger people a chance to show what they could do. And so I got, pushed into almost a director level job before maybe I thought I was ready. And that was, provided a lot of opportunity to A, make mistakes, but B, also to show and experience some things that moved me along a little bit faster. And so, I feel like that really changed the trajectory of my career. At that time, I had a boss, who worked for the CEO, who was really involved in my career. He gave me a lot of feedback. Not all of it was positive, but it was really the way that I think I became better and more engaged in my own progress and my own development. And so, yeah, that's a bit of a memorable point for me.
Yeah, I think so many great things have been said. I guess to add to that, I would say, I think there were a few defining moments, and a lot of times they were taking the job that I wasn't really sure if I wanted or if I was ready for, like, you mentioned that. And I made, particularly in the grocery industry period, I made a ton of lateral moves. I mean, I moved my husband across the country once, and it was like for a lateral move. But sometimes you got to look at the experience you're getting and, whether or not it's worth it. And I think only 3 years later, after the dust settled and it was a new company in a new city, I was the one that had, the diversity of experience they needed to step up and lead the function. And if I hadn't made those decisions that were hard and a little bit disruptive to my family, then I wouldn't have been really ready for that. So I think, and some of the assignments were not my favorite, you know what I mean? And so sometimes you got to sort of trust your path, and sometimes you have it all mapped out and you think it's going to go like this, but you can always kind of take a left turn if you're not happy with the right turn you just took, So I look back at sort of all those small moves I made as kind of the defining moments along the way that kind of set me up for really just kind of accelerating my advancement over the years.
So if I can summarize, taking the leap, even if you don't think that you're ready. Yes.
Yeah, so Jessica, could I add one comment about that, about taking a leap before you're ready? Because this is a little bit of baggage sometimes, Clay, with women, is that when women look at a job opening, they feel like they have to check every box and they shouldn't apply for the job unless they are 100% ready to go. And that for that reason, a lot of times women don't apply for a job or don't think they're ready. And we've already heard that this morning, right, from several of us. So I would just encourage you, picking up on a couple comments, that you don't have to be 100% ready, right? You need to be enough ready and to trusting your ability to learn and hopefully having the sort of supportive boss that we've heard about today to go for it and give it a try. Because often, even if you apply and you aren't selected, it's a conversation you can have with someone about what would it take for you to be selected next time. It's getting you in the conversation. It's letting people know you're interested in other opportunities and being challenged. So I'd encourage you to go, you're more capable than you may think, and you don't have to check every box in the job description to be great at it.
I appreciate that advice, Emily. I think you're spot on with your analysis there. We need to be taking chances, taking leaps, specifically when it comes to jobs that may be uncomfortable. Although moving across the country, I don't know if that's going to be, but maybe. Our next question comes from Abby.
Hi everyone, Abby Riley. I am also part of the HR team and part of the Elevate group. So my question is, have you ever been in a leadership position where the experience was a bit different than what you anticipated? And then if so, what did you learn? And were there any unintended or unexpected consequences or benefits? Darlene, I'll let you kick us off.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much, Abby. A big question there. I think that when I became vice president of Agilent Research Labs, which is our centralized research, kind of more advanced, longer range research organization, I was the first woman to lead the research labs. Easily, I'm going to say 80, maybe even 90% of the organization, it was about a 500-person organization, but about 90% was male. And certainly being female was, something that didn't go unnoticed. But it was really this breadth of technology across the organization that I was now leading that was really different, and I think posed some of those unexpected and unanticipated aspects of the role. So I was more of a biochemist. I'd been leading our very small but emerging life sciences business, and nearly the entire organization was semiconductor and electronics. And I was excited to have the role, but I was quite insecure in how the majority of the organization viewed me and my credibility as their leader. In fact, it was a position coming back to Emily's lovely remarks, it was a position that I hadn't even planned on really interviewing for because I thought the other guys, my peers, had so much more experience than I did. But my manager and mentor had certainly encouraged me to go for it. So I did quickly learn that having a PhD, even in a very different field, was well regarded, and that as I mentioned before, I wasn't there to be the technical expert, that I could engage all of this, really amazing talent by being genuinely excited to learn what they were doing and why it was important so that I could champion their success. And here's where the kind of unexpected piece came in is I knew from my interactions with most of the researchers that, they accepted me early on, but there were a few very senior, very, very nice, but very senior male electrical engineers and physicists that I was never quite sure if they took me seriously and respected me in the role. And one of my biggest surprises over the years occurred from time to time when, kind of out of nowhere, one of them would come by and let me know that they had a daughter who was studying math and science, and that he wondered if maybe he could bring them by, we could all have lunch together and, just have a chance to, kind of talk about careers and being a female in STEM. And that was like totally unexpected every time, but those events changed everything in the lens through which I was seeing our relationships. So I think, again, it kind of comes down to sometimes, not having enough confidence in yourself, and then when I got those signals, it was really unanticipated, but it just changed the relationship going forward. So, bit of a story there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Darlene.
Yeah,
We appreciate it. Emily, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I'm sensitive to time, but I'll give you a very short example. It's actually one of those turning points in my life. So after I was many years with Raychem, my second employer, they were acquired. So you see a theme here, right? You think you have your life planned and you don't, because X things happen. So I did, there was probably, 5 years of my life where I did interim CEO roles, both for public and privately held companies. And what I learned was the job was rarely as described. I think some of that was because the board was hiring the person and they were not necessarily clued into everything happening. And so I found that I needed to talk to all the stakeholders and do a lot of listening. And as Darlene said, I was not an expert in that field. I usually knew something about part of it. I was familiar with the market or the technology, but that ability to just be curious, be sincerely curious, asking open-ended questions, listening, and then figuring things out. And I think as a benefit, right, for those of us, concerned about taking on a new job and perhaps not succeeding, these interim jobs are always in a situation of a crisis. And so it was easier for me, I think, because people knew that the alternative of me not turning the company around was nobody had a job, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was, never waste a crisis. I mean, there was a real interest in people figuring it out, finding a way forward, staying in business, continuing to support the customers and everything else. So those taught me a lot about resilience and being open-minded.
Thank you, Emily. Now let's turn to Matt.
Good morning. Matt Dunn, General Manager for Performance Solutions. We provide engineered products, mostly finished machine components and assemblies to the marketplace. And this question is for Shelley to start off with, and you touched on this earlier in some of your discussion, but could you elaborate a bit on how you've drawn professional inspiration from other individuals, and maybe tell us about someone who has inspired you?
Sure. So I guess, inspiration, or really who you become, starts early, right? And it's kind of cheesy, but I couldn't say this without giving credit to my mother, who really taught me about the importance of self-confidence, of believing in yourself, of having empathy for others, and not taking no for an answer. So I think that shaped the kind of person that I am. From my professional life, I take inspiration and really development from a lot of people around me. And that's really been a theme throughout my career. I think, if you're somebody who's really watches other people and thinks about, what do I like about the way this person leads? What do I not like about the way this person leads? I've been around a lot of people who I would say I've picked things up from, whether it's, a style point, whether it's the way they deal with people, whether it's the way they do their work. I feel like, I've become sort of a conglomerate, of really what I've seen in other people and things that I've admired. Clearly the people who take time for you, so the people who have been mentors, whether that's in a formal or informal capacity, have been the most impactful, but peers are just as impactful. People that, you kind of see and you want to emulate certain things about. But just as often, I would say I've seen some things I did not want to emulate. So it's important, I think, to pay attention to all the people around you that you deal with and to take something away from that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. It's important to know what you want to be, but also it's important to know what you don't want to be, right? Back to Justin with the next question.
So, Shannon, I'm going to start with you. So, at times we can feel in our careers like we're stuck at certain points. What advice would you give someone who says they feel stuck in their career or looking for a change?
It's a really good question. And, certainly, I've been there before. I think that I can relate to that question. First of all, you got to kind of have the hard talk with yourself. Is that, are you stuck because of your circumstances, or are you stuck because maybe you haven't taken the steps that you need to take? So I'm a big fan of, okay, what can I control in this equation? And have I done everything I possibly can to sort of change my situation, right? Does anyone know I feel stuck? Is a good place to start. I've worked for many managers who have, over the years, been very open to hearing my ideas in terms of what I'd like to do and how I'd like to grow in my career. And, and I was lucky they valued me, and they, sponsored some special projects that I could get involved in. And I think, so part of it is just raising your hand and saying, like, I would like to do more, I would like to contribute more. And that is a bit of a Pollyanna answer, I know, because sometimes there's somebody out there going, but I've done all those things, right? And you got to be tenacious. You got to bring it up over and over again, but you also have to identify opportunities for yourself and say, can I lead that? Can I get involved in this project? And don't pick something great, pick something hairy and ugly that no one wants to do, right? So I think that shows your commitment. It shows that you mean it, that you're not afraid of the hard work that goes into it, right? That I mean it, and I have the hard work to back it up. But I think a lot of times we aren't great about just advocating for ourselves and really laying it out there. This is what I'd like to go do. So I think part of it is really identifying it, owning what you can own, and then, to taking the steps that you can with the support of your manager, your mentor, whomever, to help change the situation.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. We appreciate your answer. Abby, back to you. Oh, sorry.
Actually, could I maybe just build slightly, Shannon? I thought that was a great reply. And I think if you're stuck, to be your best, you got to be enjoying what you're doing and to do something and take the charge, as you're saying. And I would just add one more thing, that you know, if first off, in Materion, of course, there's, you know, you're a large company, there's lots of opportunities to learn about other areas and so forth that aren't possible in a small company. But, you know, the other thing is, you know, I really encourage you to speak with your managers about the kinds of things you'd like to do, that you'd like to do more, that you'd like to learn more, what your interests and aspirations are, because you know, managers can't read your mind, you know, and I think that sometimes, you know, we kind of think that maybe more is out there. And when people tell me that they'd like to do more or contribute in some new way, I'm really grateful. When something comes up and I, you know, instead of feeling guilty saying, hey, so-and-so or the same old people would like to do something, it's really nice for me to be able to know that somebody's looking for something else. They can always say no, but it kind of opens that path a little bit more. So everything that I think that Shannon said, but, you know, your manager can also help you see some of those opportunities maybe.
Yeah, and Jessica, I'd like to add one more thing. Oh.
Go ahead, Emily.
Okay, so I know you're trying to keep moving on, but I think this is so important for women to hear.
Yeah.
Because, and sometimes, and everything that Shannon and Darlene have said is true. You know, every so often, though, maybe the reason you want to leave is your manager. That is often a common reason people leave jobs. And yes, and there's some other things you can do right, talking to other people, but I think women sometimes are particularly bad about leaving before they leave. And what I mean by that is they've already decided, I'm never going to get credit for what I do. It's never going to work out. But rather than doing something constructive about it, they just kind of check out. They're still in the job, but they're not doing their best. We aren't doing our best. And then it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You're seen as someone who's not committed or not being creative. And I've had this conversation with men and women before, but mostly women, you know, about, that I see that I just say, stay engaged as best as you can. And if it's really that bad, then you need to take action. But you won't feel good about yourself, and neither will the other people around you. It's demoralizing for a team to see someone leaving before they leave. So I don't want to be discouraging. I just want to name it because I think we can all do better at that.
Yeah, that's definitely something to consider. Thank you, Emily.
So just quickly, I agree with what everybody has said. This is an important topic, so I just have a couple more things to add. I think, you know, sometimes you're also in the position of knowing you want to do more, you want to do something else, and you don't know exactly what that is. And I think it's important to realize that trying different things, even within your function or within your discipline, is really important. I can tell you that some of my favorite jobs were jobs I didn't want to do. And I know, you know, even in finance, in our function, people have certain preconceived notions. I don't want to work there, right? Or I don't think I want to do that. That doesn't sound fun to me. You know, trying things really is what broadens your experiences, what makes you eligible to do other kinds of things. And you may be surprised at the kinds of things you do enjoy that you didn't think you would. So I would say, you know, use that as an opportunity to take some chances.
Yeah, so I think I'm hearing a pretty common theme throughout our answers of we need to speak up, we need to take chances in our career. So really good feedback from the panelists on this panel. Next to Addie.
All right. What do you feel is the biggest barrier to female empowerment? Emily, I'll let you start.
Okay, I'll just give a quick answer here. I think it's unconscious bias. And I don't know if you've studied that or talked about that in your ERG, but if you haven't, it's worth understanding what that is because it is insidious, it's difficult to identify, it's difficult to remedy, but we can't give up, right? So that would be my number one.
Yeah, I like that answer. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add before we move on to the next question.
Yeah, I would do just a quick add too, and I think it reinforces what we've already talked about, but I think we need to have confidence in our own abilities. You know, we know our strengths, but not limit ourselves by what we haven't already done as compared to what we think is out there.
Absolutely.
I agree with both those points. I think tying it together is, you know, don't let the unconscious bias change how you think about yourself and your capabilities, right? Sometimes we stand in our own way.
We have our own unconscious bias.
Exactly.
One of the biggest pieces of advice I've ever gotten is you know what you can do and you need to stand up for yourself, right? You're your biggest advocate in life, both in your career and your personal life. So you need to take charge and ownership of that. Justin, with our next question.
Sure. This time for you, Shelley. So people define success in different ways. How do you define success, and what do you think's made you successful?
So I think success is a really personal term, right? And it's a personal journey. And so I don't think it's the same for everyone. I'll tell you what I tell my kids. I tell them, I don't have expectations for you. I don't have an expectation that you go to this kind of college or have this kind of job. My expectation for you is that you like yourself. So at the end of the day, if you're happy with who you are, if you're happy with the way you're living your life, that's to me is success. So, you have to ask yourself, are you happy?
And I'm not sure if anybody else has anything to add.
Well, I would just say, I think, similar to Shelley, I take a pretty holistic view of success. And number one, it's, am I successful with my family and my kids and as a wife? And number two, it's my own kind of self-wellness and health and making sure I'm taking care of myself and that I'm giving myself sort of the time to socialize and do things that, make me feel good. And then third, it is the career and making sure that I am in a role that challenges me every day and makes me feel like I can make a difference. And those three things, and there's other things that are in other people's model of success. And so it's always just for me about balancing those three things. And you have to accept that on any given day, you're not going to nail all three of those things. Some days you're not the best mom. Some days, you maybe miss something at work, right? And I think, but you got to learn from each of those mistakes and take it forward and stop, striving for perfection across all three or, whatever your kind of criteria are. And I think, but for me, it's always been really holistic and the job hasn't been about, sort of the title or the company. It's about the experience and do I feel like it brings me meaning every day? Because, and I think we learned this kind of during the pandemic. When we leave home and we leave our families behind, all of a sudden we reconnected, it's kind of like for me, that was a moment of reflection in that I want to make sure everything that I'm doing that requires me to leave these people at home or, be somewhere else is meaningful, I'm growing and I'm enjoying it, and I think, so to me, it is a very holistic view.
Yeah, and you touched on something that I don't quite want to move off of yet is the mental health, the self-awareness piece of that. How do you feel like you all handle that, right? So I just share a little bit about myself. I have a 17-month-old daughter who is still not sleeping through the night. So last night was a very tough night for us in the Watts household. So I came in today and this talk is rejuvenating me. It's making me excited. But how do you handle outside stressors? How do you handle your daily life on top of being powerhouses at work?
Yeah, I'll start because I like that question a lot. I think, a lot of us go, right? And even in all three of those areas, whether it's your work, your family, your personal wellness, I think sometimes we go too fast and we don't stop to sort of reflect on how am I feeling, right? And some of the, books and things that are written about success talk a lot about recovery time. And not everybody takes enough time to recover and rejuvenate, and you need that. And so you have to sort of be in touch enough with yourself to say, am I burning the candle at both ends? Like, do I need a couple of hours today where I'm not putting myself under this level of stress, right? And how do I define, what is it that makes me feel like it's good recovery or good rejuvenation? Is it, a walk? Is it exercise? Is it meditation? But I think everybody needs to know themselves and learn that about themselves and make sure they're taking that time because, we work for a company that's moving pretty fast. And some of us are working, a lot, but that recovery time is really important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't know if Emily or Darlene, you have something to share?
Yeah, I would just build on your comments there, Shelley. And I think, I work a lot of hours, but every day I take at least 45 minutes, sometimes an hour and a half, depending, for myself on exercise and working out. And generally that's for various reasons. That's moved throughout the day now to being very early in the morning. But what I feel, and I really believe, is that by having that time for myself, and I know that I've had it first thing, then I can do all those other things in terms of work and family and do that better and be the better me and more centered. So it's like there's a return on that time that's larger than the time that's taken, even though sometimes it's so hard to take that time. But knowing yourself and what's important. Sometimes you have to put that priority there.
Agreed. So we'll move to our last kind of scripted question. Matt, if you want to.
Yeah. Yes, Darlene, if you could impart one piece of life or career advice to young women or allies today, what would it be?
Well, I think it really, we've been kind of on a very similar note, for the last few minutes about, not setting limits on yourself and not, and having a position that you really care about, goals you care about, where you're going to be learning and enjoying. I mean, that's when you're at your best. And I really believe that when you're at your best, that's when success follows. Is part of that being all in and really, really believing in what you're doing. And, you may not have that at the first, move in the, early in your career, but I think that is really what we should all strive for. And then, you end up feeling, very fulfilled at work as compared to feeling like, work is more just a job or a position. I think that the this balance of work, family, and self is super important. Sometimes I've heard work, family, self, and community, all four of those. And I believe that, at different times in life, you're going to, that's not going to necessarily be a balance. There'll be different things that are stronger and that will change over time. But finding that balance that's right for you, I think is really important. And so much of this comes down to, again, the self being centered so that everything else can take off.
I don't know if anybody else has anything to add before we turn it over to live questions.
I'd add one thing, and we've heard a theme, so it's kind of pulling it together, and it would be to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, be willing to get out of your comfort zone, to take some risks, to realize that failure is often, maybe usually, on the way to success, right? And just having a failure does not define you as a failure, right? It's just a kind of a stop along the way, right? It's a temporary setback. So I just say, yeah, we're hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
Be okay with out of your comfort zone, because you will learn the most when you're not in your comfort zone.
So be kind to yourself. You're taught to be kind to others. We should be kind to ourselves as well. I think that's really important. I'm not sure if anybody in the room has any questions before we turn it over to the online questions. Nope. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jem Kosin from Tax Department. My question is, Shelley, I think you touched on mentors earlier in the panel. So going back to mentors and mentorships, anyone on the panel, is there any particular mentor or mentorship that you had that really helps you grow in your career and elevate yourself, that you can talk a little bit about more, that mentorship in detail?
I can start, and I'm interested to hear what the other ladies have to say, but my experience has been that the mentor relationships that develop authentically are a lot more beneficial than maybe ones that are assigned, because I've seen both. And I think if you find somebody that you connect with, it doesn't always have to be your boss. It can be, somebody else in the organization that you develop a relationship with, that is willing to sort of talk with you about experiences, to give you feedback. I think, those authentic relationships, at least for me, have been the most beneficial, because it's not somebody who's required to spend an hour with me, once a month or something, to talk about what I'm doing on my own development, but it's somebody who's saying, have you thought about it this way? Or, I've noticed when you do this, you could think about doing it that way, or, giving me kind of both the positive, the negative sort of feedback, giving me opportunities to do some things. Shannon talked about projects and things that you can get involved in. I think when you have somebody, and, sponsoring is a word that gets used, somebody who wants to speak for you on your behalf when you're not in the room and help you out. I think, looking for those relationships and trying to develop them, and to feel like you can take charge of that. Is there somebody that you really respect their opinion? Invite them to lunch, buy them a coffee, see if they, are willing to spend some time with you. You don't have to start with, hey, will you be my mentor? But really, can you kind of find that click with somebody and then let it build over time? That's what I think works well.
Absolutely. I don't know, Emily or Darlene, do you have any other comments?
I would just add one. I very, very much resonate in terms of, formal mentor programs can be very helpful in terms of kind of, still getting the experience. But informal and professional experience is super important. I had one mentor that especially encouraged me to do things that I didn't know how to do, which was great. But I'll just offer that I don't really think about having like a mentor. I look very broadly across people that I, have the opportunity to work with or interact with or know, and kind of see elements of mentorship in each. So the idea of having many mentors for many different things that you admire in others, and then having that lunch and developing that relationship and getting to know the person, I think can be really helpful too. So this decentralized mentor is just another thought there.
Yeah, I think it comes back to building a community, right? So we've kind of woven that theme throughout our discussion today, but community, it seems to be a very important topic. Jason, any online questions?
Yeah, we do. We have several. So not addressed to any one person, but in the spirit of embracing equality, was there ever a time in your career where you noticed things weren't right and you stood for change in that moment?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. Am I on off mute? Yeah. Okay. So I think I'm probably the eldest one in the room, so I maybe had a little more experience in some of this. And I think it may be easier now because it's more of a conversation. But when I started working in the 70s, it was, women's lib was still a thing, and it was easy to be labeled and sort of marginalized about that. So it definitely helped to have multiple women in the room, but that took some time to get to that, because when there is, you can be supportive of the other person, in a way. So the classic, a woman says something, no one listens, a man says the same thing, and he's a genius, right? And so there's ways you can support that woman, right? Saying, things like that. But I think the essence of this question is some sort of inequality, right? Or lack of equity. So what worked best for me, and again, back in the day, was to find a man, maybe my boss, or someone who was sympathetic, often one that had a daughter, right? Or they were sympathetic, or a working wife. And when I could talk to them, then they were just in a position to be more effective bringing it up. And I would try to do things in private rather than in a big public meeting. That I did try that. It did not go well. So I think trying to be more influential, if there's a job opening and I thought there was a woman that was particularly, appropriate for it, I would talk to her about applying, maybe talk to the hiring manager about how capable she was. And I might mention how great it would be for the company to have, for the hiring manager to put a woman in that job, right? I mean, I just tried to do my best to get small steps, moving forward. But absolutely, I saw them. And the question was, could I be effective in making a change?
Yeah.
Or would I make things worse or better by the way I approached it?
Yeah, I give a shout out to allies very much in the spirit of Emily's remarks. When I was a middle level manager, and especially in a larger meeting with people who maybe external visitors who didn't really know who was who, I would almost always be the only female in the room. And you could just tell the unconscious bias. I could feel it in terms of people assuming that I really didn't have a right to be there, that I was in some other role versus the department or the division lead. And many of my male counterparts, peers, and as well as in the group, would go out of their way to introduce me and make sure that they that the audience knew who I was and why from the start. And I thought that really made a difference. But I also always tried to follow that up by saying something really intelligent early on in the meeting, just to make sure that we put this to rest. But allies have been very helpful when I've felt that this isn't right.
Right. So working together as a team.
Yes.
So manufacturing is not an easy field to be in as a woman. And that said, how do you think we can make manufacturing a more welcoming place for women, particularly in our more male-dominated departments such as operations, engineering, maintenance, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm going to direct this to both Shannon and Shelley, since it seems to be a Materion question. What are your thoughts here?
So I think it's really important that we have, we were talking about allies, but people at all of our locations that are thinking about how do we make this environment comfortable for everyone. And, you know, whether that's men, women, whether it's other diversity, you know, I think you have to look around the environment and say, in what way are we making this, you know, really focused on, you know, the men or, you know, some other group, and what would make this a more comfortable environment for women, and what is it that's important to them? You know, I think we do have some environments where it's just been set up because it's traditionally been a place where men work, and I think we have to sort of take a step back and take a look at it and say, what could we do to make this different and to make it more comfortable?
So just even starting the conversation.
Yeah, and you know, so you mentioned you know, reaching out to a man in the room who had a daughter. You know, I mean, when I visit some of the sites, one of the things that is I think kind of inspiring that maybe we're moving in the right direction is, I mean, I've seen, you know, where fathers have said, I want my daughter to come work here, you know, and so here they are, they've worked there, you know, 20, 30, 40 years, and they're thinking about how does this environment be a place that, you know, my daughter can come and work, feel respected, feel like she can build a career. And I think it does take, you know, everyone, not just, you know, here in this room or on the phone, but folks who are, you know, on the production floor also kind of joining us in that journey, because I think that's where the real change can happen. But it was inspiring to hear that, at least in one case, but I know we have a long way to go to make that environment just more welcoming and fulfilling for women.
Absolutely. Jason?
Yeah, we have quite a few questions so far. Is there anything that you thought was impossible before, but were eventually able to achieve? If so, how did you make it happen? So maybe an example.
Emily, I'm going to direct this to you first.
Oh, okay. Well, certainly in the tech industry and some of the startups, right, we would have an idea of a product or technology that we weren't sure we could do, right? And then we got a very diverse team together and was able to do it. I'm not sure if that's the spirit of the question, right? Which really, it was really more of a technical commercial challenge, or was it a personal challenge? Do you have any idea what the spirit of that question is?
Not specified, just says, is there anything you thought was impossible before at one point that eventually became possible, and how did you make that transition happen? So I guess it could be interpreted either way.
A little bit of risk taking in there, right? You know, I've been in roles where, you know, I was given a job that I thought, oh no, I don't know why you're giving me this job, because I don't know how to do it. I'm not ready to do it. And, you know, that became one of my favorite jobs. And so, you know, sometimes somebody's telling you they believe in you, and you're thinking, yeah, I actually don't really know how to do this. And, you know, all of a sudden it becomes something that it's a learning opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to grow. And you think, hey, if I'm a good leader, I can lead anything, right? So it does give you confidence to go try to do something you really don't know how to do. And it's something that I tell other people, younger people in the organization, is that nobody goes into a job knowing how to do it. So try to remember that you don't have to have this whole thing mastered before you go take that role. You're going to have the opportunity to learn and to grow, and you'll have people around you that will be helpful. So, you know, it's back to sort of that theme of risk taking.
And I think that one of the keys in there is the people around you. I mean, it's very rare that you're in a situation where the people around you aren't also invested in seeing you succeed. And it's okay to be vulnerable and say, you know, I don't know how to do this, and I might need to lean on you. And people appreciate that. They like to help others, and I think they want to help folks that want to grow in the organization. So I do think, you know, when I've been in situations like that, it's like, all right, well, I don't know how to do this. Who does? And how do I make them, you know, my partners in this endeavor? And you know, I think the spirit of the question, you know, how do you tackle the impossible? That's the only way, I think, is by really making sure you're surrounding yourself and building bridges to the right kind of sets of expertise to help you get there. But, you know, but doing it in a way that, you know, you're in it together, and it's not to, you know, it's a team accomplishment, you know, is usually the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think when I think back to the scariest transitions I've made, I've almost talked myself into that I will be the only one making the decision. So I will be the only accountant in the room, and nobody will ever help me. So I think it's important to, again, reemphasize the community, and that nobody's going to leave you high and dry when you make these big, difficult decisions. In the interest of time, we'll probably take one more question, Jason.
Sure, if you want to do that. Just in full transparency, I'm cherry picking some questions here out of a list, but I'm doing so based on reactions of the group, just in full transparency. So with thumbs up and hearts are the ones that I'm asking, all right?
That's what people want.
That's what they want. So
Big lead-in. I can't wait to do it.
No pressure to whoever asks the question.
speaking of unconscious bias, women who are assertive or have strong personalities are often misunderstood as being confrontational. Does anyone have advice on how to navigate this?
Here's the thing. There's a lot of leaders that wield a lot of power in any organization. They all have different styles, and you have to be authentically who you are, right? But I think through the process of growing in an organization, you learn how to. And I've gotten feedback time and at various times where certain things I should do differently and so forth. And you've got to continue to work on those things because how you connect with others is usually really critical to your success. But there's a lot of and I think that some people, that is their personality and how they lead, and I think there's also a lot we need people who are assertive and can step up and lead, and we do need to sort of value that and soften the edges where maybe we need to. But there's so many women that are assertive in a different way, and really as we're thinking about people who've inspired us, I've worked with leaders who are assertive kind of behind the scenes, and they're such a great advisor that nothing happens without them kind of weighing in and leading the CEO or the executive to a decision. And so I think it's important to be assertive, and you got to do it authentically in the way that works for you, and take your feedback along the way. If that's something that is important for you being effective, then you got to take that feedback. But there's so many ways to be assertive, and I think I would hate to see anybody not be assertive because they felt like that is, going to be a detriment to their advancement, or, it's going to be viewed as, just less of a team player, et cetera. So I think, you got to be true to yourself, but take the feedback. But also there's a lot of ways to be assertive, in ways that will deliver the same results.
I think that's a great answer. Yeah. I think probably people think I have a strong, personality. My style might be a little bit more gregarious than others, but I think part of, helping people understand you is building relationships, right? So it's always important for us to put ourselves in other shoes, and I try to do that, even with my style. But I think the more you can spend time getting to know people, they understand what's at the root of the way that you operate. And because, to your point, Shannon, nobody really changes exactly, their style, but you can certainly round out edges and make sure that, you're building relationships so that it's really at the core how you relate to each other versus just, what you think of somebody from a distance.
Absolutely. Emily?
I'll weigh in on this because I think it was, it's a very personal one for me, as you might imagine. And I thought about it in that when I went to school, it was all with guys. I was one of the few women in engineering, and working in manufacturing, chemical manufacturers, one of the few women there. And so I think I sort of adopted male-like characteristics and thought nothing about being pretty direct about things. And so I think the unconscious bias part of this question is, when a woman is assertive, right, or she is aggressive, and when a man says the very same thing, he's a leader, right? I mean, I think that's the unconscious bias part of it, which is difficult to attack directly because people don't see that part. But I think this whole thing about emotional intelligence, and I don't know if, Elevate has looked at this, but I think there's a lot there, right, in terms of, and then the other thing is, one of the best things I ever did was get an executive coach, which I didn't want. Someone told me I needed one, so I got one. And I think one of the best things about an executive coach is they tell you how other people view you, right? Because we have our own narrative of how we think we are and how we think we come across, and we don't always, right? And so I think understanding that and adding some emotional intelligence, right? So you can sort of read the room and understand, so you can start, your statements, in a way that might be more acceptable to who you're talking with, or even saying, I'm really passionate about this, right? So you're trying to frame the situation, right? You're trying to use words like passionate rather than aggressive, right? Aggressive almost sounds like a bully, right? Which is not the case. So I do think there's sometimes the soft stuff is the hard stuff, the interpersonal things. And I think as a leader, as a woman in leadership, that's something I've had to work on a lot. So I would just encourage, maybe the ERG to have some resources available or some workshops or role plays or different things. I think there's all kinds of ways as career development to do things here.
Yeah, no, that's some good perspective. I'm looking at my team, making sure they're making notes on what the suggestions that you've given. So I just want to say thank you for joining us, both in the room, virtually, and especially to our panelists, those on the West Coast where it's 3 hours behind.
Jess, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I squeeze one more question? I think it's kind of important because it's from a viewing group from our Elmore facility that's getting a lot of hype. Right. So if I could just squeeze in one more question, if you don't mind, before you wrap up.
Okay.
And that is as follows. As women, we tend to live with imposter syndrome throughout our career, no matter what our credentials are. Does that ever go away? How do you move past that the more you move up?
I think awareness is really important, right? That being aware that is generally a feeling, and it is one that women talk about more. But I also see it in men sometimes too, that you feel a little bit like, okay, am I really ready for this, or am I really good enough to do this job? I think, it comes back to sort of that confidence and kind of reminding yourself, why have I been put in this role? Why do I have this opportunity? And nobody goes into a job, I talked earlier about knowing how to do it. You also don't go into a job being perfect at every aspect of it. So to Shannon's earlier point about surrounding yourself with people who complement you, who can help you, you almost just have to kind of push through and think, okay, I know what I bring to the table. I understand why I've been selected for this opportunity. What can I do to make sure that I'm surrounding myself with people who have the strengths that I don't have?
I was going to say, I don't think it ever really goes away. It's more about keeping it where it needs to be and not overly letting it become too significant. There's a little bit of that makes us want to be our best and to do our best and to continue to strive to be even better. And it's okay to wake up, I think, once in a while at night and think, well, I wish maybe I should have done this or whatever. But you don't want to let it control you, and you certainly don't want, when that imposter thing comes up, you want to counter it and make sure that it doesn't take too big a role. But I don't think it actually ever goes away.
It just gets easier with experience because
you get better at dealing with it.
Exactly. I've been here before. I felt this way before, and this was the result. I can do this.
Yeah.
You got to learn from the last time that happened and the 5 times before that it happened.
Just get back in there. Exactly.
Absolutely. So I think it's important for us to continue the conversation because we've come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to do. The time is now and the responsibility is ours. So one easy thing that you can do is join our Elevate ERG. If you want more information, contact me after the event and I'm happy to chat with you. We are working through a recording of this event and hopefully it will be available to employees through Materion Matters. Thank you and keep exploring the ways to continue to embrace equity.
All right, thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.